So what we're going to do in this video is I'm going to have this primarily aimed at an audience of people that fit the role of like stereotyped uninformed American, the person that knows where Canada is, knows where their own country is, knows where Mexico is, and that's about it. Like they don't know that much about world geography, and that's fine. It's like no problem with it. You don't need to know where Brunei is to get through daily life, but it's information that it's like, hey, if you want to have an opinion on like foreign intervention in Syria, if you want to have an opinion on what's going on in Venezuela, it just kind of helps if you can point to it on a map. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to point to places on a map. I'll give a bit of backstory information if I know about it, and we're going to go from there. That's pretty much it. I'll treat you like you know pretty much nothing because, again, I want this to be aimed at people that really don't know that much, and that's fine. Like, that's nothing wrong with that, but that's what this video will be. So we're going to start here with, obviously, the United States, of all places. I think everyone can point to this on a map. Canada to the north, Mexico to the south, and then first thing we're going to do is honestly just look at Alaska and take a moment to realize how big Alaska is and how close it is to Russia. Like, it actually is quite close, just bordered by the Bering Sea to the south and Chukchi. I probably butchered that name. Again, apologies in advance for all the butchering of the names that I will do here. But Alaska is like, it's the biggest state, but I think people forget how big Alaska is, despite the fact that like there's barely anyone living there compared to when you think about electoral votes and that, like there's barely anyone there, but it's a humongous state. But then we're going to move down south here, actually. We're going to move to Cuba. And people sometimes forget exactly how close Cuba is to there's the Bahamas right there. People forget how close Cuba is to the United States. So here's Florida, and there's actually Key West, the southernmost point in the United States, right there on that little island. There's a long road like that goes through a bunch of different islands known as the Keys, and there's actually the Florida Everglades up there too. But here is Cuba. I believe it's just 90 miles from Key West to Havana, or at least Key West to the closest spot on Cuba, but this is Cuba right here, and it's actually surprisingly big of all the islands in the Caribbean. We have, there's Haiti, where we've heard about all this, like the absolute tragedy of Haiti. I believe there was the tropical storms that always wipe through and completely destroy everything in its path. There's Haiti right there. It's actually half of an island right there with the Dominican Republic, and people actually point out how it's the same island, and you look at Haiti, and it's, no offense, it's a pretty awful country. Like, it's nothing against the people, it's just the place is a horrible place to live compared to the Dominican Republic, which is right next to it. And then again, there's Jamaica, a much smaller island there. There's the Cayman Islands. I know people bring up the Cayman Islands a lot. Is that the place where people stick their money? I believe so. That's it right there. And here's Puerto Rico. Right next to the Dominican Republic, there is Puerto Rico, which is controlled by the United States, capital San Juan. And then there's actually the U.S. Virgin Islands right next to them, and then the British Virgin Islands a bit higher. And then a few other small countries here along the edge, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines. And then actually Trinidad and Tobago is the one right here, which is interesting. I believe it's the only country to have a capital city named after another country, Port of Spain. Over here, here's Honduras is the spot right here, which everyone talks about, like the Honduran caravan. That's believed to where that thing kind of started and then spread through. They went from Honduras all the way up to the border here. There's Panama, Panama City is the capital. This is where the Panama Canal is, that the U.S. funded heavily, and I think it was one of like the deadliest projects ever. Thousands of people died on that project. But yes, there is Panama. That's why the Panama Canal is so big, because it's the smallest point, like the narrowest point of land here, and that's where people can cross through. But then we have Colombia, and here is Venezuela, right here. Venezuela, where everything is bad, people are dying, socialism has taken over, capital city Caracas, right there at the north. And it's, basically all bad. Like, this is where people have been trying to escape, where people have been eating zoo animals, where people have been eating rats off the street, and pretty much where everything has gone downhill with Maduro in control. And that's going to be the subject of politics and intervention over the next few months. Now, actually, another interesting to point out here is French Guiana. France controls a surprising number of spots. Like, as Europe pretty much spread out and conquered most of the world, there's still a few spots that, like, the U.S., the UK, and France still own. And I believe France is actually the country with the largest amount of time zones. If you include all the territories they own, they spread across the greatest number of time zones. So this is actually a French territory right here in South America. But then we go down even further. What is wrong with my scroller right now? Then we go down to Peru, Ecuador, Brazil, like humongous country, one of the biggest country in South America here, and then Argentina, and then there's Chile, this just small sliver along the border here, where if people know about Augusto Pinochet, where that's Pinochet throwing communists out of helicopters. That's what he's all about. Zoomed out a bit too far. We'll go this way. We'll go over to Africa. So important places in Africa. I know there are only like one or two people that actually believe this, but again, Africa is not a country. I forget who said that, but that's remained a thing ever since because people are making fun of that one statement. But a few places in Africa that, again, when I say important countries, I can't remember if I called them important or not, but when I'm talking about, if I gloss over a place, it's not because it's not important, it's just because you probably haven't heard about it. There's nothing like big going on there right now that has been all over the news, so I'm only going to restrict it to the places that you've probably heard of at one point. Right here at the top is Libya. That is the place that the United States invaded back in, was it 2012, I believe, took out Gaddafi. Rather big country in Africa. The countries tend to get bigger, I believe, as like the farther north you go when it comes to Africa. That's the place where the U.S. basically brought back slavery because we completely like just wiped out Gaddafi, and it's been horrible since then. Like ISIS was known for a while as ISIL, the Iraq or the Islamic State in Iraq, and the Levant, I believe that's over there, but we'll get to that in a second. But there's Libya. And there's Egypt. Like, there's the Nile River right there. This is Egypt. There's Cairo. So the Egyptians are still there. Not exactly with the pyramids of Giza. I don't even know where Giza is. But I should probably have looked that up beforehand. But there's Egypt. As we move down, Somalia, the country that's known for like having no government and total anarchy, and that it does have a government that controls, I believe, roughly like half the country. It's like half government, half pirates. But there's Somalia on the edge here. There's Kenya, which was a rather popular topic during the 2008 elections. Kenya, where Obama was supposedly from, that's where this is. Or where he, at the very least, has relatives in. I'm aware of that. But that's Kenya. And then Uganda. For some reason, Uganda is always in the news, too. Like, people always talk about Uganda. That's one of, like, the most, I guess, well-known countries in Africa. Uganda, which is known, that's where Idi Amin ruled, the guy that had such a long name that I can't even remember it. It's just look it up sometime. Idi Amin, his actual title that he gave himself, it's like a whole paragraph. It's hilarious. But there's Uganda. That's where the whole Kony 2012 thing, I believe, was there. The children being kidnapped and that's Uganda. As for other places here, I'm trying to think of any other spot. There's Nigeria. That's another one that people are relatively familiar with. And then at the bottom here is South Africa, of course, known because it is the southernmost point in Africa. This is actually like it's I don't know the exact number of demographics, but it's heavily European. I believe it was the Germans that came down and settled this area. Interestingly enough, Namibia used to be like the South Africa colony used to be much bigger and encompass Namibia, and then they became independent later on. The funny thing is, Portugal actually landed in Namibia, realized they didn't want it, and then just left. And then later the Germans came back and thought it was a nice place to settle. But this is South Africa. This is where you hear about everything going on. This is where you hear about all like the farmers, the Kill the Boers. That's the name of a book that I have yet to read. I own, but I have yet to read about everything that's been going on here. Now, South Africa, I believe, is actually very unique for having like kind of three different capital cities based on like the three different parts of governments. They have Cape Town here at the bottom. I'm not even going to pronounce that, but it's like Bloemfontein. Right there, and then the one that, like, if someone ever asks you, like, what's the capital of South Africa, Pretoria is the one I've always seen listed as the answer on, like, multiple choice questions, and that Pretoria is, I guess, is the main one. But that's an interesting fact about South Africa, and I believe Bolivia is actually another one over in South America that has two capital cities instead of just one. But that is South Africa. Everything you've heard about in South Africa, like, that's where this is happening here. And they actually have a little enclave there, Lesotho, capital Maseru, I want to call it, something like that. And then Swaziland there. Zimbabwe. There is Zimbabwe right here. That was there. There was the whole coup, I think, was back in 20... 2017, 2015. I can't remember. There was the coup there where, if you've ever seen that picture of the military, like two military soldiers, like I don't know if they were generals or not, two members of the military, they took over the news station, sat down in their full military gear, and was like, no, the military is not taking over. They're like, no, there is no coup in Zimbabwe, in full military gear on TV. So I thought that was hilarious. But that's Zimbabwe. And then Madagascar, of which the popular... Was it Pixar? I can't remember. DreamWorks? I think it was DreamWorks. Madagascar, that movie, or two. Was there a second one? I think there was a second one. But that's Madagascar there. Which is actually... People have told me this was original. This is kind of like an Asian colony. Like more Asian than African, because what happened over here, we have the Indian Ocean here. What happened was the Malays from Malaysia over here actually kind of just hopped from island to island. They went over to like stop by Sri Lanka for a bit. Then they stopped by the Maldives, which are so tiny that you can't even see them here zoomed out so far. And then hopped over to Seychelles, then hopped over to Madagascar and settled there. So there's actually like a lot of Malay influence there. As for Africa, I believe that's about it. So I guess we'll move up towards Europe. So again, like most people know about Europe by now, if you're in the first world or if you live in Europe, most people could know these countries here, but we'll say briefly, there's Iceland at the top, Greenland, which is freaking huge. The UK, Ireland, the United Kingdom is, I believe that for the full term is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So Northern Ireland is part of the UK, but Ireland itself is a separate country. That's something I think I probably didn't know about a good 10 years ago. But there's that. They are two separate countries, with the Isle of Man right there in the middle. It's a territory of the UK, I believe, territory of the UK. And the sad thing about the Isle of Man actually was that it just kept getting invaded because we're talking centuries and centuries ago, when the Irish and or when the Celts and that, when they would when the two civilizations would kind of hop back and forth, a way of showing that they weren't going to declare war, but still wanted to show strength, that they were powerful, that they weren't afraid to use force. They would just conquer the Isle of Man, because it was assumed that if you're going to conquer the other country, you would need to first conquer the Isle of Man. So they just kept getting attacked back and forth. It just kind of kept getting handed around like that, which it's hilarious, incredibly depressing in a way. Not to make fun of people being conquered, but yeah, that is something that unfortunately happened. Norway, Sweden, Finland. If you're talking about, like, if you've heard about everything that's been happening in Sweden, there's Sweden right up here. Norway to the west, Finland to the east. Russia, actually, Russia, like, we're going to zoom out. Russia's a huge country. I think it's the largest country in terms of just land mass. But actually, the interesting thing about Russia is actually right here, too, in Kaliningrad. This small spot here is also Russia. It's just a very small spot that somehow got cut off. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. We got Belarus. There's the Ukraine. Everything you've heard about with the Ukraine and Russia, the quarrels there, the influence there from Russia. That is the Ukraine. I won't go through all of these countries. Yugoslavia used to be this area, and then kind of separated into, 5 or 6 different countries. Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Slovenia, Serbia, Kosovo, Macedonia, Montenegro. I can't remember if Albania was part of Yugoslavia as well, but this was all Yugoslavia, which was established after World War I. We have Italy over here with the Alps at the north, Milan up north, and then, like, you've probably heard about most of these places, Venice to the east, Genoa to the west. As you get farther down, you actually have a country here called San Marino, which I will hover over only slightly. This is its own country. It is not part of Italy. It's very tiny. It's literally just like a mountain. And I think it's the one country where there are actually more cars than people. There's maybe not the one country, but I have heard that as a fact about San Marino, more cars than people. It's so tiny. It's just a mountain and then a cliffside. Like the capital cities, not even capital city, but the capital building's right on the top because it's just a city-state. Right there. And then Florence, as we go further down south, here is Rome with the Vatican City to the west of it. And the Vatican is actually also its own country as well. Oddly enough, it's very tiny. Again, actually, it's not even that Vatican is to the west of Rome. It's that the Vatican is right in the middle of Rome, kind of here. This small spot there. It's just a few buildings. St. Peter's Basilica. I probably butchered that name as well. That's about it. It's its own country, very tiny. And then the island of Sicily here as well. But on to, there's Greece. Greek civilization. So you had the Roman Empire here, you had Greece here, which, like, think about that is the perfect spot for a civilization right there, just with all of this travel here, all these possible ports you could have, and all that. I will move over here quick before I move out of Europe. We have Germany, obviously, Poland. So the poor thing about Poland was Poland got invaded from both sides, which is why they tend to be pretty woke when it comes to being both anti-communist and anti-fascist. Not to confuse them with Antifa, but I mean legitimately anti-fascist, because you had Russia that would invade them from the east, and then Germany would invade them from the west. So Poland, like, and actually keep all their buildings up there too. I'm told that, like, all of these horrible buildings and that were established by the invading countries, they keep all those buildings there as memories. So I find that very interesting. But there's Germany and Austria to the south. Hitler was all about uniting Austria into one Germany like that. Down in Austria there. France, and then Spain, and then Portugal. And then there's the little Strait of Gibraltar there, which Gibraltar is actually a United Kingdom owned territory, I believe. So the UK owns a little spot right there. And then Malta, which I think has only like 480,000 people. It's really small as well. But on to the east. We're moving to the east here. We have Turkey. Again, Turkey, you've probably heard about Turkey. There's Istanbul up there. Istanbul, formerly known as Constantinople, formerly known as Byzantium. So Istanbul was like it's a very great city to own, and for that reason it got conquered several times. And the neat thing is, in Istanbul, you'll find the Hagia Sophia, I believe it's pronounced. It's like one of the most beautiful buildings in the world. It was a church, and then when the Ottomans took it over, the Ottoman Turks took control of it. They actually thought it was such a beautiful building that instead of tearing it down or messing it up, they just turned it into a mosque. And by that, I don't mean that they like messed it up and like massively modified it to make it into a mosque. They pretty much kept it as is and just replaced the religious symbols with Islamic symbols. And then I believe then that the term Hagia Sophia was actually changed. It was actually twisted around a little bit. I don't know if it was actually renamed, but just twisted to the Ottoman pronunciation of Hagia Sophia. But that's something about that. Something that I only learned a few months ago is that Istanbul is not the capital of Turkey. I always thought that was the case. But no, it's Ankara, which is right here. So even though Istanbul is the biggest city in Turkey, it's kind of like it's kind of like New York, where the capital, even though New York City is the biggest building, even though New York City is the biggest city in New York, it is not the capital. That is Albany. But moving over from Turkey here, over to Syria. You've probably heard about Syria in the news quite a bit. This is Syria here, with Damascus at the south. That is where, that is always, I believe, always been in control of like the actual, of Assad's forces. For Gary Johnson here, there is Aleppo. Right up here, there is Aleppo. I believe for a while, ISIS had control of Raqqa, was their capital or not. Not Raqqa. Yeah, I believe it was Raqqa. That might be it right there. Raqqa. Lake Assad. I just learned about that now. But yes, this is Syria. This is the place that has been in the news all the time. And this is why people have been talking about the problem with leaving Syria. And I'm for leaving Syria. But the problem with leaving Syria is that you are going to leave the Kurds victim to the Turks. And the Kurds are up here in the northeast. And here's Turkey, as we just established. So that's why people are worried about that, because Turkey borders them right there. And then over here we have Lebanon, which, if you know who Gadsad is, I believe that's where Gadsad is from. That's a nice channel. Look him up. He's a cool dude. And then here is Israel. Here is Israel, and then Palestine and the West Bank right here. So Israel kind of controls all along here, like along the edge here, and then Palestine right here, right around. And then there's Jerusalem right there, right at the border there, which is why that has been such a subject of controversy. But anyway, and notice how close Israel does actually border Egypt, I believe. Yes. So that's interesting. Just as they're right next to each other. You wouldn't think they are, but they are. And then here's Iraq. So you know how when we invaded Iraq, and then we just kind of went over to Libya and then back into Syria. So they do share a border there. There's Baghdad, the capital. Iraq, where Saddam Hussein was. Iraq, where that 9/11 was used as an excuse to get us to invade Iraq. And there's Kuwait to the south there. And then over here is Iran. So Iran, one of the bigger countries in the Middle East. Now, I'm told officially that Iran is actually the easternmost country in the Middle East. That Afghanistan, which again, you've heard, we've been in Afghanistan for who knows how long. We're on 18, 19 years now. Afghanistan is apparently not officially part of the Middle East. It It is part of, I've seen people call it part of Central Asia, other people call it part of South Asia. But yeah, that's Afghanistan here, and then here is Iran. And then here is Saudi Arabia, another big country in that area. Saudi Arabia, like with the Saudi princes and all that. That's where the one journalist was, Khashoggi, I can't remember his name, where the Saudi Arabian, or where that journalist was killed. And then they just kind of dressed up another dude that didn't even really look like him as a supposed like excuse to say, no, he's alive, he's right here. They have been attacking Yemen quite a bit. There's a war going on between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, in which we are actually supporting the U.S., meaning we are actually supporting Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, but this is Yemen. And then over here is Qatar. You've probably heard a little bit about Qatar. That's the place where like it's incredibly rich because they've got loads of oil. That was in the news back when I was like in middle school. I can't even remember why it was in the news, but it was. But there's Qatar. Anyway, this is all the Middle East here. Moving on to the east, we have all the stands. Kazakhstan, capital Astana. Uzbekistan, capital Tashkent. Turkmenistan, the capital is escaping me right now. Kyrgyzstan, the one with a really weird spelling name. That is pronounced Kyrgyzstan, I am told. I'm not zoomed in far enough, but I'm told that is pronounced Kyrgyzstan. And then Tajikistan. So you don't hear too much about them, to be honest, but there's a bunch of stands there. Afghanistan, and then Pakistan, and then India, as like just recently in the news, the conflict between India and Pakistan. They don't like each other that much. I read a good book called Train to Pakistan, I believe. It was a fiction book, but it talked about the whole quarrel between, or basically all the like Islam and Hindu, Muslims and Hindus really don't like each other that much. All of the Muslims went up towards Pakistan, and all of the Hindus moved down towards India. And then I feel bad for the Sikhs. They didn't have their own country. Poor Sikhs. But yes, there's India there. Big country, I believe over 1 billion people now. It's insane. And then Sri Lanka, which is kind of known as the teardrop of India for obvious reasons, with the Bay of Bengal there. There's Bangladesh, known for its child labor. I did a video on this, how like if you think child labor is awful, we once tried to ban, or rather boycott, anything made from child labor in Bangladesh. And just by trying to, all the companies were like, well, we're going to fire all our children, and then they either starved to death or became prostitutes. So that's an interesting fact about Bangladesh, that it's kind of like child labor is such an awful thing, but it's more of a solution to an even worse problem, unfortunately, that if you all of a sudden just ban it and make it illegal, the kids tend to become prostitutes. And I would argue that if I was an 8-year-old kid, I would rather work in a factory than as a prostitute. I don't think I could get away as a prostitute. I don't think I'd be a very successful prostitute. We have Nepal and Bhutan there. Bhutan, very it's known for being like a carbon sink, I believe, where they actually like take in more carbon than they actually put out. Bhutan is like very, very isolated for the most part. Like I think they actually had to force TV on their population before. They were like the people just didn't want TV, and the government was like, well, like we got to introduce TV, and the people were like, we don't want it. So they actually had to like ease it in as if it was this difficult transition to introduce them to TV. But overall, here's Myanmar, which was in the news. I can't remember why a while back. Myanmar was in the news back when I was in high school, and previously known as Burma. And I've heard people pronounce it Myanmar. I believe it's Myanmar. And then there's Laos, better known, I guess I'm told the official pronunciation of Laos is Lao. Thailand there, and then Cambodia, which, what was in Cambodia? The Khmer Rouge, I believe. And then Vietnam here. This is the subject of the Vietnam War, North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Trump was just there recently in the capital of Hanoi, up here. Yes, we have Vietnam as this strip here in South Asia, and then the South China Sea right here. Going further down, we have Malaysia. There was actually something like, I memorized this a while back from some kids' TV show. I can't remember what it was, but they said Singapore is in Malaysia. Well, that used to be the case, and not anymore. Singapore is its own city-state. It's kind of like Hong Kong. It's been described as basically Hong Kong, like a trading hub, except deeply authoritarian. Like, Hong Kong is known for being an incredibly free market, like Milton Friedman in his documentary Free to Choose. Episode 1, he pointed to Hong Kong as such a great example of the free market. Great trading port. And then you have Singapore here, which is, again, like quite opposite. It's quite authoritarian, but still very successful city-state. And actually, the interesting thing about Malaysia was they referred to as the Malays. They were the Malay people. And I don't even know what the country name was at the time, but it was just the Malay people. And then they incorporated Singapore and became one country with Singapore, and that's where the SIA comes from, the SI comes from. Malaysia is the Malay in Singapore, Malaysia. And then once they separated, they still kept their name, and it's just like that's how it's stuck ever since then. Did I mention Brunei in this recording? One of these recordings, this is like recording attempt number 5. I mentioned Brunei. There's Brunei. Geez, what is just happening there? Here's the Philippines off to the east. A lot of Filipino nurses. If you know the stereotype, like we get a lot of nurses from there for some reason. But there's the Philippines there. Capital Manila. Loads of islands. Philippines named after Philip II of Spain. It was originally a Spanish colony. And then I believe the U.S. took it over. And then the Japanese took it over briefly during World War II. And then we got it back. And then we gave them independence. And they wanted independence. And we were like, okay. I'm massively oversimplifying that, but apparently that's what a quick Wikipedia search will tell you. That was the quick quarrel there. And for that reason, what was I going to say? For that reason, actually their Independence Day is the same as the U.S., July 4th. And oddly enough, when we're talking about comparisons between the Philippines and the United States, our national bird is the bald eagle. Theirs is the Philippine eagle. Manila, there's another fun fact. Manila envelopes, if you've ever, the Manila envelope isn't named after Manila, but it's named after Manila hemp. The hemp that we used to make Manila envelopes out of, and Manila hemp was from Manila. So it's kind of in a roundabout way derived their name from there. But yes, loads of people in this country. It's surprisingly, it just seems very tiny, but there's loads of people in there. I believe it's 90 million or something like that. Loads of people. And which when you think about it, is it's more than Canada. There's more people in the Philippines than Canada. It's freaking huge. But then, should we go up north or south? I guess we'll go up north quick. Here's China, big country. Again, 1 million people. Mongolia to the north. If you know about, if you ever watch Mulan, the Mongolias, or the Mongolians invading China. If you ever watched the South Park episode about building a wall to stop the Mongolians, the invading Mongolians. Mongolia was where Genghis Khan was from, as he went over and pretty much just Genghis Khan wasn't a very nice guy. It's something like there's a large percentage of people in this area that can have ancestry with Genghis Khan because he raped that many people. But yes, not a very nice dude. But he moved all through the west here. And actually, we forgot to briefly mention Georgia and Azerbaijan. Georgia was in the news back in, 2013, 2012, something like that, because they were fighting for independence from Russia, and they did successfully. So they're this small country there. But yeah, that was just something I briefly messed up there. Armenia, if we're going to talk about the Young Turks and the Armenian genocide, again, the Young Turks and Armenia is right there. I forgot to mention that, but something worth briefly mentioning. But yes, Russia up to the north, China here, Hong Kong is right down here, Taiwan, and then China and the Koreas. I keep forgetting. For some reason, I keep thinking that the Koreas are down, right around where Hong Kong is. But no, they are up here. There's South Korea, there's North Korea, and there's Japan. So, of course, North Korea actually shares a border with China. And I believe I think that's where people try to escape. People try to escape to China because it's much easier to get to China than it is to get across that, no-go zone right at the border between North and South Korea. And then there's Japan right here. Also loads of people in Japan. And they own it's very hard to see, but they do own a few islands right down there as well. And then as we move further south down here, we have Indonesia, which is a bunch of islands, a bunch of seas here. And then Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. And then Australia, again, another big country, Australia. They have the entire continent, which I guess people have been talking about rumors of kind of labeling this whole thing as a continent, like Indonesia to include in the continent of Oceania or Oceania, however that's pronounced. I've read that one place, or somewhere at one point in the past. I have no idea if that was just one person or if that was an actual thing that loads of people wanted. But yes, here's Australia, the Australian outback, all the way up here, or this big area here. And then for the most part, I don't have satellite turned on. Actually, we'll turn on satellite for a brief second so you can see just how much desert, just desert here in the middle, and pretty much all of Australia is all along the border, the eastern border here, the southwest border there. That's all Australia. And then Tasmania there, Tasmanian devil. That's what it's named after, Tasmania. which I believe is a colony, or not colony, a territory of Australia. Whereas we go to New Zealand. I showed this to someone once, and they were like, I didn't know it was that far south. But yeah, New Zealand is all the way down here, capital Wellington. And this is where people might know heard of New Zealand from Peter Jackson. This was where Lord of the Rings was filled with all the beautiful landscapes. New Zealand down here. And as a comparison back to the United States, there's New Zealand, and we are back up here. And there's Hawaii there. And there's a few like a surprising number of Pacific islands here. They're so tiny that you have to zoom in quite a bit just to see them. Like, again, for reference, there's New Guinea, Australia, and we're going up here. Northern Mariana Islands and Guam right here. Again, there's the Philippines for comparison. The United States, they're both U.S. territories. The interesting thing is Capitol Hill in the United States is actually in the Northern Mariana Islands because that is their capital city, Capitol Hill. And then you have other countries like Palau. And Nauru is here somewhere. Here we go. Nauru is like they're known as the rags to riches to rags country because they were very poor, and then they were very rich, and then they were very poor again. And then a bunch of other smaller islands here, countries, and that, like there's Samoa here. These two countries right here, or these two islands right here, and then American Samoa, another American territory to the east of them. Fiji, that's probably the most popular, well-known, like, Pacific island here, but lots of tiny islands here. And French Polynesia, I could zoom in, but there's loads of tiny islands here, like loads of them. Again, like it doesn't look like that many, but that's because I haven't zoomed in far enough. Loads of tiny islands controlled by the French there. And then Easter Island, that's another one. Where is Easter Island? Is that it right there? That might be it. It's in the middle of the ocean here somewhere, but that's Easter Island. I don't want to pick something and then turn out to be wrong. But the interesting thing actually about like the Polynesians in the Pacific Islands is that way before we had GPS technology, they found all of these islands. Like every single island that could have been settled was settled by the Polynesians. I find that very interesting. Like this whole massive space here, and the Polynesians found a way to find every single island, which makes you wonder how many of them like just died getting lost at sea, if they ever did. I don't know, maybe they eventually made it somewhere else, but it's just like there's so many tiny islands here in this big mass, and yet they still found them all, which to me is incredible. But yeah, I think I covered pretty much everything. Again, we're back to Russia up there. I'm trying to do a brief gloss over. I guess we can briefly point out Seychelles, which is right here, but it's actually a bunch of islands. I believe 115 islands, like right here. I believe it's more coast than actual like land, or most of their land is coastline is probably a better way of putting it. Seychelles, all these tiny islands here. If you're ever bored and you're not at work, because this is not something to safely look up at work, look up the Coco de More coconut tree that is in Seychelles. It's very interesting. Again, not something that you might need to explain yourself if someone looks over your shoulder and sees you're looking at the Coco de More if you do a Google image search. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I think I covered it quite briefly. I just wanted to just point out, there is Syria. You can now point to Syria on a map, hopefully. With all of these countries, and just get a general idea of where things are and why they are, and just the conflicts between all of these different countries. But that is pretty much it here. Like the video if you enjoyed. If you thought this was I know this was much more rambly than I meant it to, because all of this, I don't have a note sheet. I should have made a note sheet, but this is all off the top of my head. Let me know what you think in the comments section. If I got anything wrong, leave it. If I'm an uninformed American and I got everything wrong, leave a link in the description. Last thing I guess we'll point out, because I noticed it here, country of Cyprus. There's Greece, there's Turkey, Syria, there's Cyprus. That's the one that went totally bankrupt in a few years ago. They're flat broke, as far as I can tell. I haven't heard anything about it since then. Maybe they're okay, but I believe they're still broke. They're still in financial distress, along with Greece. But there's a good idea there. So there's the Arctic, if you needed to know where the Arctic was. All the way up in here, and then Antarctica to the south. I think you could have probably found that out by yourself, but that's that. Let me know what you think in the comments section. If you like the video, again, if I got anything wrong, because I learned all this stuff over the past few months, I picked it up from podcasts here and there, so maybe I got something wrong. Maybe I overlooked something. If I didn't include your country, I'm so sorry. Again, I'm not going to go through all of the different countries of Africa. I'm not going to point out, I don't think too many people will memorize Togo if I point them to where Togo is on the map. I don't think too many people care. When it comes to the capital of Chad, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, because it starts with an N and it has an apostrophe and ends in Djamena, something like that. There's half an attempt. I'm not even going to pronounce half of these capital cities because I can't. I'm not going to embarrass myself probably any further than I already have. I'm going to stick with countries like, or with capital cities like Oslo in Norway. That's simple enough. Or Warsaw in Poland. Yes, let me know what you think in the comment section. Hopefully this was helpful. Share this around to someone. Every time someone says, like, every time someone gets their facts completely wrong and can't even point to a spot on the map, maybe send them this. But I just kind of wanted to, like, try to put out some information that hopefully wasn't too much. That was more of, I wanted it to be as brief as possible, even though this has been a half-hour video. Because, again, if I told you everything I knew about each one of these countries and pointed them all one by one, we'd be here for hours. So I just tried to stick to the ones that, just because I didn't mention them doesn't mean they weren't important. It just means I try to stick to the ones that you've probably already heard of, and it might stick with you better if I pointed to it on a map and, like, here this is. I'm not trying to teach you all of these new countries. I'm just trying to give you a bit of information about the ones you may have heard of in the past. But like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more, especially subscribe if this was helpful. Thank you. Welcome to all I got a huge subscriber boost recently, so thanks to all of you new subscribers. I really appreciate that. The subscribe button, like, really helps. And thanks for watching.